apparently that didn't mean just more, air defense weapons or whatever, but more troops. Do you have any knowledge about what he's talking about?
Well, first of all, no, I'm not on the inside of this administration, and I'm not in a position to give you any specifics of what's under consideration. What we can say is the following. We have to be very careful right now. Syria as a country no longer exists. In fact, I would regard Syria as more a region, much like Bosnia-Herzegovina. It's not a country. It's got many different people in it. It was always held together by a strong figure of some kind. And that figure, whoever it was, has always been controversial from the time that the great Salahuddin was in Damascus until now. So it's a place that it no longer exists except on paper or perhaps in the minds of people in Washington. What you're seeing now is a land grab, not just by the Israelis, by the Turks. And I think the CIA, MI6, and so forth are trying to hold their respective jihadist organizations in readiness to do the bidding of Washington and Jerusalem. But that's going to become increasingly difficult. The Turks are now building up for what obviously will become an offensive against the Kurds in northeastern Syria, because that has become the sort of core element of a Kurdish state in the future. And that's something that is unacceptable to the Turks and has been since they warned us not to do stupid things in 1990 and 91. So that's off the table. The other thing is that the Israelis have already moved in. They have a so-called buffer zone, which is now being condemned by various people. And they're taking over territory which they have every intention of colonizing. This is what happens when a state is fragile and it really cannot defend itself. And now the great powers that are involved in this, Russia, the United States, Iran, have decided to do different things. The Iranians have pulled back, viewing this as a lost cause. The Russians decided after their investment that it doesn't make any sense anymore. And they have options to go elsewhere if they want another base in the Mediterranean. There are others who will welcome a Russian presence. So they've decided to leave. Now what's next? Well, we have joint Turkish-Israeli hegemony, at least at the moment. But that too, in and of itself, is very fragile. One of the things that happened recently that nobody paid attention to, and everybody needs to think about this, is that the Turkish intelligence chief flew to Damascus a few days ago, and he landed at the airport, and then he was driven immediately to the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus. And there he prayed. And after praying, he then went on to meet with various representatives of the jihadist groups and I'm sure the intelligence agencies. Now, why would he go to the Umayyad Mosque? Because that represented the caliphate between roughly 860 and 950. That Damascus at that point was an Islamic capital of enormous importance inside the Islamic world. Remember, that too was Salahuddin's capital. And it was a capital several times in the future for various reasons. The Turks are sending a message, and he sent a message by worshiping in that mosque. His message was clear. The empire is back. And by empire, we mean the Turkish Empire. The Turks are now going to move to consolidate control over as much of Syria as they deem necessary. They will back these Sunni Islamists, these jihadists, and incidentally, they're helping these jihadists now destroy already Kurdish and Arab elements in northeast Syria that are obviously sponsored by us. So we're headed into more killing, more conflict. What we've done is, instead of preserving this ridiculously phony post-liberal world order or rules-based world order, we've created chaos. The chaos will continue.
And keeping on that term or on that theme in the region, you have recently published a piece in the American Conservative titled Iran, America's Next War of Choice. And I want to go into some specific things that you said in there, but I want to kind of set it up because I think that probably supporting some of your contentions is something that Benjamin Netanyahu just said.
מזכ"ל חיזבאללה נעים קאסם, אמר את זה אתמול בפה מלא. ציטוט: חיזבאללה איבד את נתיב האספקה הצבאי דרך סוריה. והדברים האלה הם כמובן עדות נוספת לפגיעה הקשה שהסבנו לציר האיראני כולו. אבל עם זאת אני מבקש גם להעביר וגם להזהיר. אנחנו מחויבים למנוע גם התחמשות מחודשת של חיזבאללה, וזה מבחן מתמשך עבור ישראל. עלינו לעמוד בו, ואנחנו נעמוד בו. אני אומר לחיזבאללה ולאיראן, בצורה שאינה משתמעת לשני פנים, כדי למנוע מכם לפגוע בנו, אנחנו נמשיך לפעול נגדכם ככל שנדרש, בכל זירה ובכל זמן. על כל זה שוחחתי אמש, שוב עם ידידי נשיא ארצות הברית הנבחר, דונלד טראמפ. זו הייתה שיחה מאוד ידידותית, מאוד חמה ומאוד חשובה. דיברנו על הצורך להשלים את ניצחון ישראל.
Israel's complete victory. Now, in this article, you wrote that you believed that it was Netanyahu's top priority to destroy Iran before Trump comes in. Do you still hold to that?
Yeah, I think so. There are a couple of reasons that Netanyahu in particular, but the Israelis collectively will want to move sooner rather than later. There is always a danger with Donald Trump, and I mean this in a good way, that Donald Trump comes into office, surveys the territory, and decides, wait a minute, we don't really have to destroy these people. We can cut a deal with these people. And I mean that. That's the way Donald Trump thinks. He's very transactional in so many ways. Instead of fighting, we can do X, Y, and Z. The Israelis are not really interested in any deals unless the deal confers on them complete and total victory over whomever they dislike at the moment. So that means he's talking about Hezbollah, he's talking about Syria, he's talking about the Arab populations inside Israel and potentially expanding beyond that into Jordan and Egypt. So he's not terribly interested in deals unless it gives him something that justifies a pause from which he can then move further in the future. Donald Trump is not interested in that. Donald Trump is not someone who is seeking confrontation with anyone. That's why I think there are a number of neocons who are worried that he's simply going to say, we've made terrible mistakes in Ukraine. We've got to get out of this. And I'm going to sign off on neutrality, and I'm going to sign off on getting us out and let the Ukrainians and the Europeans sit down with the Russians and sort out the borders. I think he's afraid. There are many people in Washington afraid he's going to do that, but that would be the smart move. And I think Donald Trump is a good businessman, understands there are times when you cut your losses, and Ukraine is clearly one of those. Then we move to the Middle East, and he knows the stakes are high. Maybe he doesn't know how high, but he knows they're high. Russia, as you pointed out earlier, has withdrawn or is in the process of withdrawing from Syria. They're going to give up these ports and move out. But that doesn't mean that Russia will abandon Iran. On the contrary, if Israel strikes Iran, they will find Russia standing next to Iran. And striking Iran without us is a really tough nut to crack because their air and missile defense systems are very good, and they can identify aircraft and incoming missiles and shoot them down. So I think he will go first and foremost when he thinks he's consolidated his position in Syria against Iran, because Iran is the ticket to bringing us into the war directly. Now, clearly, nothing that has happened on the Israeli side could have happened without us. You can look at the vast stores of munitions, our intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, the weapon systems, obviously. But Iran is different. These people are not Arab states subsisting exclusively on oil with teeming populations that are unhappy. He's dealing with what I would call perhaps the most modern nation state in the region, and that's Iran. And I think President Trump will look at Iran as a place where he too could cut a deal. I don't think that's something that Mr. Netanyahu wants. So if you don't want a deal, you attack Iran. And then when Iran responds dramatically and decisively, which it will, that's when you call upon the United States to say, please, please come in and help us. And
now,
we will. And
one of the objectives that the U.S. has claimed for decades is that we want to, quote, prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And so all these actions, whether it was Obama trying the JCPOA or Trump's getting out of the JCPOA and saying we want a better deal, because he did say he didn't just get out, he claimed he wanted to negotiate a better deal, et cetera. But now then, especially with Israel taking out Hamas, devastating Hezbollah, weakening further the Houthis, and then now all of a sudden emasculating Syria after Assad fell. They launched 800 was the last number I saw, airstrikes to just destroy everything military related with inside Syria. So now then, Iran is much more vulnerable, especially on the south, and there's concern that the IAEA has reported that the amount of fissile material being processed is continuing to expand, and giving indication that Iran may make the political decision to finally go after a bomb, the thing we say we wouldn't want to do. In this environment, do you see, or how do you see the risk that Iran may take that step to defend itself?
Israel has enjoyed a monopoly on nuclear weapons for decades. We initially, under President John F. Kennedy, were reluctant to provide them with the assistance and support to build a nuclear weapon. Ultimately, it came from the French. But they've had that, and that has made a difference. If you go back to as recently as the 73 war, the Egyptians and others carefully considered the wisdom of trying to invade Israel. Now, the Egyptians never got there. They never got to the across the Sinai. But then again, the Egyptians really weren't interested in invading Israel. But had they been, there wasn't a whole lot to stop them initially after they crossed the canal. Israel's possession of nuclear weapons never left the mind of Sadat. He mentions that in his memoirs. He said that to his generals. Do not ignore that reality. They have got a nuclear weapon. Israel fears very much the possibility that not only Iran, but also the Turks could have a nuclear weapon. Both of them can get nuclear weapons quickly. And the Turks have made it very clear that if Iran becomes a nuclear armed power, they will become a nuclear armed power too. And they've always made it very clear that they would have help and assistance in this from Pakistan. Now, the question is, how do you prevent the Iranians from going nuclear? I don't see how you do it at this point. Put yourself in the shoes of the Iranian leadership. What is the incentive to remain naked and unprotected in the face of Israeli nuclear power? I mean, the Israelis have made it pretty clear that you are a subhuman, you are Amalek, you deserve the worst. And the Israelis are just as intent on destroying the Iranians as they are on destroying the Arabs. And frankly, anybody that stands in their way, let's be frank, that's where it is right now. What would you do? Well, if you're an Iranian, you would probably invest in a nuclear weapon. And I'm quite confident that they're well on the way to it. They have always had the expertise, but they haven't done it. Now, once they've got it, and you try to destroy these facilities, which I don't think we'll be able to do, but who knows? The facilities are distributed. They're not all concentrated in one area, and they are underground. But if you do it, you try to destroy it, that will actually reinforce the mindset in Iran that, you know, we have to have this to preserve ourselves, because if we don't have it, the next thing that comes our way is a nuclear weapon.
Now, you also wrote in this piece, wasn't all bad news. You say that if it's handled deftly, that there is a way to successfully manage the chaos, is the phrase that you used, and to avoid conflict. How can Trump come in the event that he gets a chance, i.e. that Netanyahu doesn't launch something prior to January 20th, but if he gets in and there hasn't been a war, how can Trump manage the chaos to prevent war and manage Netanyahu?
I think it should be clear right now that we continue to have enormous influence with the Israelis. Whether or not Donald Trump will exercise that influence by simply saying, we would like you to stop where you are as opposed to continuing, I don't know. I mean, I just don't know the answer to that. Looking at his cabinet and where things are at the moment with the Trump team, it strikes me that he would have a great deal of difficulty trying to say no to the Israelis. On the other side, what kind of influence is he going to have on the Turks? Well, I think he's a realist. He's going to say Syria has always been a problem for the Turks. And if the Turks want to go in and essentially drive the Kurds out, or give the Kurds a chance to become part of the new territorial solution, whatever that turns out to be, that will effectively make Syria a satellite state of Greater Turkey, then that might be fine with him. I think Donald Trump knows that neither you nor I nor anybody in the United States wants to be involved in another Middle Eastern war. All of these wars have turned out to be catastrophes for us. How many trillions of dollars have we lost on these propositions? What have we gained from it? I mean, I remember President Trump said, well, we got the oil in northeastern Syria. That oil is a drop in the bucket from our standpoint, but it was important to the Israelis. There are other things going on. The potential to divert the flow of oil through Turkey or through Israel into Europe, which I'm sure Donald Trump would favor. On the other hand, there's still a lot of pressure to move it straight north through Iran all the way up into Russia. I don't know how he's going to go forward to try and divide this child, but those issues will be on the table. He understands those things, and he'll try to sort through it. But the bottom line is, right now, to get back to the core question, if you want to manage this, you have to recognize legitimate security interests. The Turks have legitimate security interests. The Israelis have legitimate security interests. The Iranians have legitimate security interests. What are our interests? And suddenly everything's silent, because quite frankly, as long as the oil flows commercially in whatever particular direction it takes, we as a great power remote from the region should be happy. I mean, that's always been our view. The reason we maintain such a large Navy for so many decades is to ensure that commerce flows uninterrupted. So what is our interest? Well, our interest is Israel. And the Israelis want to control territory, and they want to colonize it. And we're going to back them on that score. And if the Turks go along with that and the Iranians go along with it, then perhaps you can reach some sort of arrangement that will work. But barring that, barring the acceptance of Israel within a new set of borders with the promise of no further expansion, I think the war goes on.
And let me ask you in the last few minutes we have here, how you see the medium and long term for Israel, because if you're looking at the near term, without any question, militarily, Israel has substantially defeated or diminished, if not destroyed, Hamas, Hezbollah, degraded the Houthis, and obviously wiped out Syria, etc. So the security environment has been enormously tactically successful for Israel. But I argue that they are planting seeds for long-term instability because of the damage here. Because right now, at least as we're talking, the issue of the Palestinian people has still not been resolved. They haven't gotten them out, but they also have destroyed any ability for them to live any kind of a life for the foreseeable future in there. So how do you see the middle and long-term security issues for Israel?
Well, if you're an Israeli right now, you look at what's being done in Gaza and what is beginning to happen on a smaller scale in the West Bank, and you say, no one in the region cares about Arab life. Whether those Arabs or Muslims or Christians, it doesn't matter. Nobody really cares. That's being demonstrated in their minds very conclusively. None of the Arab states in the region will raise a hand against them. The only potential adversaries they've got are Turks and Persians or Iranians. So in that sense, they see this as a big success, and they will continue to murder or expel Arabs from Gaza. They will do the same thing, the Palestinian Arabs. They will do the same thing to the Palestinian Arabs in the West Bank. That's going to go on and on and on. The question is, what do the Turks do and what do the Iranians do? They don't love each other. That's obvious. They have disputes, but they also have avoided going to war with each other. Neither side wants to go to war and then ruin themselves in the face of Israeli power. So the question is, how much longer does this new territorial arrangement in Syria last until the Turks decide they've changed their minds? They're fed up and they're not going to tolerate what the Israelis are doing. I can't answer that question. But I think it's a long-term strategic challenge that they have to meet. Same thing is true with Iran, although Iran's threat to Israel has always been different from the Turkish threat. The Iranians aren't interested in the territory. They have stood by the Palestinian state issue. That's now dead on arrival. There's no chance whatsoever in the foreseeable future of a Palestinian Arab state emerging in the region. It's not there. And again, to reiterate, the Saudis, the Emirates, the Egyptians, the Jordanians all don't care. Whatever lip service they pay to it, they've already demonstrated. We don't care how many people the Israelis kill to expand control of their state. You know, back in 1871, when the Franco-Prussian War ended, Bismarck fought against the acquisition of Alsace-Lorraine. He admitted that the Alsatians in the northern part of Alsace-Lorraine really were Germans, and they were not comfortable being Frenchmen. But he pointed out that Lorraine had long since been lost and had become truly French. He said, let's just leave it alone. We don't want it. Ultimately, he was overruled, and the statement was made by him subsequently, what our sword has won in 50 days, we will have to defend for 50 years. And eventually, in less than 50 years, you got 1914, and 1914 was about reacquiring Alsace-Lorraine by France, if nothing else. So I'm afraid that whatever happens now cannot be legitimated exclusively through power. Power legitimates for a while, but it's not the permanent solution to anything unless you maintain your military supremacy to such an extent that the enemy won't take you on. That did not work for Germany, and I don't think it'll work for the Israelis. But for the moment, if you're an Israeli looking across the Middle East, you see that the face of the Middle East has changed, exactly as Mr. Netanyahu has said. And you're celebrating, and you're planning for a bright and brilliant future. But I'm sure there are very smart people in the Israeli Defense Force General Staff who are looking at these threats and problems very carefully.
Yep, and we'll have to leave it there for the moment. But there's so many things that, I mean, gosh, the world could change again pretty dramatically after January 20th on a number of fronts, and we'll be right here to try and piece that together and figure it out. Thank you very much for coming on today, Doug, and providing us with this great insight on all these issues. Appreciate it.
Merry Christmas to you and everybody, and a Happy New Year.
Same to you and to your family as well.
Right. Bye-bye.
And we appreciate you guys. Always grateful to have you here. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't. If you're new to the channel, we value you greatly. We'd love you to hit that like and subscribe button so you can keep getting great stuff on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing you on the very next episode.